I really think I'm only scared if my wife becomes more powerful because in some way I think it compromises my power. And in codependent dynamics, that is actually true. It's control masquerading as love. We always just have to come back to like, how is my partner coming fully alive, not in service of me, not in service of the relationship? Like, who wants to leave a relationship that brings them fully alive? No one.
Right.
Unless it requires them staying small and you remind them they're powerful and then you try to hold on to them and then they leave. And then that's exactly what you needed to wake up.
Yes. Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I just interviewed my friends, Mark Groves and Kylie McBeath, who are a married couple. And you might know Mark because he is the founder of Create the Love. He's also the host of the Mark Groves podcast. He is a human connection specialist. And he and Kylie, his wife and the mama of his baby, just wrote this beautiful book together called Liberated Love, Release Codependent Patterns and Create the Love You Desire. And we talked all about codependency. And Kylie, you might know her on Insta as Being is Beautiful. She shares daily guidance and teachings on relationships and spirituality and embodied liberation. She's a certified health coach and the host of the Journey Home podcast. So together, what I love about how they've written this book is they're basically sharing their experience from sort of a more conditioned love and breaking up. It's not a spoiler alert because they're talking about it in interviews, and sort of coming back to, and how really curing their codependency had everything to do with their ability to create liberated love. So I hope that you enjoyed this interview with Mark and Kai as much as I enjoyed interviewing my friends. Oh my God, you guys, welcome to the Terri Cole Show. Mark and Kai, I'm so happy you're here.
We're so happy to be here.
So stoked.
All right, where do we even start when we're talking about Liberated Love, your new book that is coming out soon? Oh, beautiful. So I've been loving what I'm reading, but I want to talk before we even get into it about why now for this book.
Oh, man. It felt like such a necessary encapsulation of the process and pathway we walked together. When we were in the throes of our relational challenges, we didn't have the guide to what we were seeking.
Right.
We went to psychotherapy, we did couples weekends, we did all the things. And in our walking of the path, we really learned a lot about how to liberate ourselves through the frictions that we were having and seeing the relationship as an opportunity. And, spoiler alert for the people listening, we even broke up in there, and seeing that actually leaving one another was a necessary part. And actually not even, there was not a we're coming back together. It was like, this is done. And just how much love was reinforced through that process. And in the coming back together, the stuff we did separately while we were apart, and just how it set the stage. So I think now, because we needed to put it into a process, I think, for people. What about you?
Yeah. When Liberated Love dropped into my consciousness, this concept, I was like, Liberated Love, interesting. It pinged something deep within. And it was like, it's time. It's time to liberate love from the shackles of shame, from codependency, from intergenerational patterns, from everything that's keeping our hearts closed, our souls depressed, our bodies frozen. And in my experience of walking this path with Mark, it was like, oh, here's one of the pathways available to people to support them in doing that work, to reconnect to their bodies, to reconnect with their hearts, to actually allow love to flow again in ways that, in my experience, haven't necessarily been modeled yet in a big way.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that this provides a new template, a new modeling for a possible way to navigate relationships with more grace, with more love, instead of more dysfunction and more wounding and, just continuing down the rabbit holes that we've been running into.
I feel like you guys have done it with this. And I love the way that we've got two perspectives in the book, so that really, if you don't identify with one, you definitely identify with the other. So people have their own experiences, and you guys really fought your way out of that block that you got to, the breakup, all the things, in you each doing your own work and really focusing back in. It wasn't about you're doing the wrong thing. It was, what do I need to do to heal? As you were saying, Kai, the generational stuff, the stuff that's sort of been handed to me, this template, this blueprint, if you will, about what love is supposed to be or what love can be. So let's talk a little bit about what, in your estimation, is liberated love.
It's love that's free from conditions, from obligation, from expectations, from needing to be anything other than who you truly are. There's no domination, there's no exploitation or manipulation present. And it's orienting to love from a collaborative space and also from a place of mutual respect. Like, I respect you, I see you, and I'm going to treat you with, as we describe in the book, positive regard. Like, I honor you and your soul as a whole competent being. I'm no longer going to treat you like a child. I'm not going to treat myself like a child. It's like, it's time to actually treat each other from a space of, respect, reverence, and also competency. Like, we need to level up how we're engaging with each other.
Yeah.
And in our experience, the walk to liberated love was that walk from really young parts of ourselves to a more mature, integrated adult who could have and hold those conversations. So liberated love is the work, like you said, is coming back to self, to have that internal foundation so that we can stay grounded and anchored in self while being in relationship without needing to fold ourselves into pretzels and do all these things that we thought we needed to do to source that love, to source that safety.
And I'd say ultimately it's a dedication to telling the truth, like a dedication to, we like to reference it as being like laying the truth down at the altar of the relationship. And, formally in our relationship 1.0, Kylie really identified with what's wrong with me that I can't choose this relationship. And being that I loved problem solving and people pleasing, I was like, yeah, you do have a few things I can help with. I actually have a job where I monetize this codependency. This is great. Let me just insert you now. And so what really shifted towards the end of our relationship was this, actually, maybe what's coming up in you is just not coming up in me because I don't have the awareness to it. Like, maybe what's the truth that you're now self-identifying as having a problem, and that's why the experience exists. What happens if you're actually incredibly wise and you're incredibly brilliant, and what's coming up for you needs to come up for the relationship? And when we started to orient from that perspective to what she was struggling with, and what I was struggling with was over pursuing, not staying in my own lane, in my own life and what I wanted to create, and continue to compromise. And that pulling back and saying, you have this sense that you need to leave. Why? Maybe there's truth in this. It was a complete shift to, like, we are dedicated to telling each other the truth, and at the cost of all things.
Even the relationship.
Yeah. And in some way, what was so profound in hindsight about that dedication was that now the relationship is an authentic choice. Like, we have access to a no. So now her yes, I trust her yes now. And vice versa, I hope.
Yes, I do. I trust his yes.
Yeah. The people-pleasing aspect, though, that we're talking about, and the acceptance, and if we look at the childhood patterns of behavior, which you guys talk about in the book, it's like, what did we learn about how to be loved, how to get love, how to stay safe, all of those things, that the courage that I've found in your story, and I knew the story before I read the book, but there's something about how courageous you have to be. And what you said before, Mark, really struck, where it's like the willingness to let the relationship end, if that's what the truth was, because the sweetness of choice and the sweetness of coming back and being like, this is free will, right? This is free will. This is not obligation. This is not because we thought it was going to be. And I feel like that, to me, even in my heart, even us just as talking about it, feels very expansive and liberated. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, and obviously, Mark, all we ever want to talk about is codependency. That I feel like this is such an integral part of your story and of the book. So let's, from where you guys sit, let's just talk about what is codependency.
I know you're the codependency queen, so I'm going to share our definition of how we orient to it in the book, and we'll just riff from there. But codependency in the book and how we define it is when we source our safety or security, belonging, validation from someone or something outside of ourselves at the expense of our core needs, our sense of well-being, and our wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And the key words being at the expense of. Yep. I always get this in conversation. Well, I have needs and I need to rely on others. It's like, no. Of course we have needs. Right. We're human beings. We have needs. And that's a beautiful part of this process. What I'm saying is it becomes codependent when it comes at the expense of your wholeness, at the expense of your own well-being.
Yep. Because that's where the extreme is, though, right, Kai? Like, that's what we're talking about as humans. We want to be healthily codependent or interdependent, as I would say it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
Because that's called being in relationships and being in society and being human beings. Like, we need all of that. Right. But I do think that the distinction is important of at the expense of, meaning I have to give that up. I have to give up prioritizing myself in order to be safe. And I'm putting that in your hands.
Yeah, not fun. In that earliest earliest imprint in we kind of break it down in the book, but in early childhood, if there was a inconsistent attachment figure or a lack of attunement, etc., in those early environments, this comes from such a young place. It's like, I'm going to leave myself, disconnect from my center, and I'm going to orient around you, mom, caregiver, dad, whoever it might be, and intuit your needs and constantly live on this reel of like, what do you need? How can I help you? What do I need to do? How can I diminish this conflict? How can I take care of the siblings so that they don't erupt? How can I? And it's like this hypervigilance in the external environment at the expense of our whole internal environment. When I sit and reflect on that from like a nervous system perspective, it's like there wasn't enough or sufficient co-regulation for there to now be healthy self-regulation in adulthood. Yeah. So we're still seeking that survival connection, as Sarah Baldwin calls it, of like, I need you to be okay. And that's kind of what it looks like in adulthood, is like, I need you to be okay. Yeah. And it's like that vigilance of like, I need you to be okay. So what do I need to do to make sure that you're okay so that I'm okay? Yeah. And I don't know about you, but it was so exhausting.
It is so exhausting, because you spend so much of your energy on it as a radar. And not getting to live, and you're also feeding your own lack of self-worth, that your value is only in the creation of safety and security, which of course comes from such a beautiful place. That's the thing, is to have compassion for its origin. But as adults, we can have compassion for an origin of something, but also not tolerate it anymore when we know it's not productive for the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's anxiety inducing, and you feel like you're spinning out. You wonder why you got gut issues. You wonder why, you're depressed. You wonder why you give up on the things that you need most, and it's like a throw in the towel, like full self-abandonment, full send, And so like, if our relationships can be the place that we start to see as informing of where we leave ourselves, or where we even the relationship is focused on one person even more so. That there's this opportunity to explore it with humility, and no matter the challenges we have, there is a recognition that the challenges we're having are trying to heal stuff that's unhealed. I mean, we just had a kid, so add that to the mix, and I'm like, hey, I thought I was a good communicator, but when you're really tired, I'm not quite as good as I thought.
It's kind of amazing when you think about what happens, at least in my therapy practice, what I've seen over the many years, that when you have a kid, and in my own experience, every unresolved thing in your childhood, when your kid hits that age, you're going to be remembering things where you're like, what did my parents do when I was 5? What happened when I was 10? Like, it's so interesting. So the more work we do, the less we have those experiences. But I swear, I could not believe it. I inherited kids, right? I didn't bear children. I inherited kids. But how the most messed up things from my teenage life, because they were young teens when I came in, I couldn't believe it. I was like, how was my mother sleeping on a Tuesday night when it was 3 a.m. and I was not home? Like, what was she doing? And a bunch of that
Totally.
stuff was shit I forgot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we haven't had the full spectrum of the growth. He's at 11 months, so.
No, but there have been moments of that.
Oh, 100%.
Where I was like, I think at month 8 or something, I was talking to my twin sister. I have an identical twin. And I was like, we kind of experienced something similar in our breastfeeding journeys around the same time with both of our sons. And I was like, what happened? Something,
Totally.
I was like, something must have, like, we're processing something. I don't know what it is. I don't even think I got to the root of it. And I don't need to get to the root of it. But essentially, one of my mentors, when I was talking to her, she was like, the narrative that she kind of invited in and to explore was like, it's safe to connect. And it like softened again this piece of armor around my heart that I had with it makes me emotional. But it's like that I had in relationship to my son based off of stuff I don't even know, like where it comes from, how, why. And of course I can look up my intergenerational line and, explore how relationships between men and women have probably impacted this lack of safety between the two. But it's like, the pure innocent being, and so it's so beautiful to be able to alchemize that.
Yeah.
And like, I think, on the other side of that codependency is like, it's safe to connect. It's safe to be here. It's safe to be with it all.
It's safe to be awake. You know what I mean? Like, this is what your book is walking us through. You guys, in case you just joined us, Liberated Love, it's for sale right now. You can go pre-order it. Release Codependent Patterns and Create the Love You Desire by Mark Groves and Kylie McBeath. Anyway, this ability to love and be open-hearted, and what you're really talking about in the childhood stuff, which I do want to get into, about sort of, as you walk us through it in the book, the roots of codependency, that there is something about healing that inner child experience of lack of safety. And again, we're not blaming anybody. We're just like, let's just figure it out for us and the next generation.
Yeah, right.
Because people are all like,
exactly.
I don't want to blame my parents. I'm like, listen, I'm not even talking about your parents. Like, who cares? Like, they did what they did. You know what I mean? You just have to be honest about what they did.
Yes.
You have to be honest about how it impacted you. We don't have to say that they had a terrible intention. I'm sure they didn't, or maybe they did. Who knows? But none of that is helpful. What's helpful is, where are we now? And what do I need to do to sort of move forward so that, because what you were describing, Kai, before, I had a therapist many, many years ago, for many years, who was talking about how we hand down unopened packages. So, and I was dealing with feeling like I had this fear that I had been sexually molested, but I didn't have any memories. And I was like, but I don't know why I feel paranoid around these types of people. I'm not comfortable in this situation or whatever. And then it came out that my mother had been sexually molested by an uncle by marriage. And my therapist, explained, and she's like, Terri, what happens is you could have this experience and it could feel like your own and not be, because your mother didn't process her experience. She handed that to you, because my mother was very much like, don't have sex. There was the messaging.
Oh, really? Like, wow. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. Be good, sort of,
Yeah.
And, but again, that was fueled by what happened for her. It was very much a protection thing. Anyway, so what you were saying, I think, is very potentially accurate. And I always say to my clients, if something is coming up and they're like, I don't understand, like, I don't get what this is, we always start with, is this any kind of an anniversary date? So let's say you had a parent who had an affair when they were 37. If you suddenly at 37 started feeling kind of itchy in your marriage, or thinking that your old boyfriend looked kind of good, you'd want to look at that and go, oh, is that me? Or am I just viscerally and physiologically responding to this anniversary date that actually isn't mine?
Isn't that so fascinating? I think it's interesting how even like a nervous system perspective, we find ourselves unconsciously relating to people. I remember talking to Sarah Baldwin about this, who's an expert in the nervous system. And she was talking about how, like, if your parents have a pattern, let's say there was infidelity or something like that, you might naturally you're like, why am I always drawn to married men? And it's like, what an interesting, fascinating pattern to explore. What you're saying, like anniversaries coming up, all these things that don't make any sense in our own experience. but they have yet to be worked through in the lineage. And I think a lot about that, of like, what a gift that the lineage trusts you. What a gift that the relationship, the love in the relationship, because, you know, sometimes the stuff comes up because of the absence of true care and,
Right.
and positive regard. But that's still an opportunity to look at, where did I learn to be in relationship with people who don't have respect for me? Which means I have to not respect myself. Like, I could be the first person in a couple generations, maybe 5 generations, who actually treats themselves as sacred. Like, and I think like what's so powerful about healing codependency and moving to that interdependency, to liberated love, is that I want Kylie to feel treated as sacred. I want myself to feel that way. I want the relationship to be a sacred place. And that's such a restoration. You know, it's like my parents have a great relationship, and I don't feel bad that I want more.
Right.
You know, like, right? Like, it's I don't feel bad that I want to like move through defensiveness. I want to move through, I want to go deeper. And I don't always want to. Let me be very clear. I don't
Right.
always want to in it, but there is a deeper commitment to Kylie and to myself that is in service of this relationship and my being. I'm going to honor what is coming up. I blame her for it coming up sometimes, but I recognize that it comes up in me, you know, and so there's an opportunity.
So good.
Self-responsibility, that's another big one.
Major. And owning, you know, with what you guys are teaching also, it's like looking at what are we each bringing to the table? And in your own estimation, working with couples and all the stuff that you guys do you see people being able to take responsibility for their triggers, for their history, or do you think that that is challenging for folks to do?
I mean, in the work that I've done with a lot of the women in the last couple of years specifically, they're hungry. They're ready. They're ready to process the grief. They're ready to look at the impact of their childhoods and what they received, what they didn't receive. You know, that being a really big one of like, oh, I didn't receive the protection, the safety, the guidance, the mentorship, the love and tenderness that I needed. And that really hurt. In my work with a lot of women, I'd see that there's almost the opposite, where there can be like an over responsibility of relational dynamics and of taking on too much of the pie. It's almost like this, like very similar to my narrative, this internalization that there's something wrong with me, or that it's my fault, or that I must be doing something wrong. And it's like, hold up. Like, yes, we have our stuff, but then there becomes a point in time where it's okay to like stand your guard and actually start calling out things that are no longer working in your relational dynamics. I'll never forget when one of my mentors said to me, like, you cannot open to deeper levels of love and tolerate abuse in another area of your life. And I'm like, that's the level of self-regard that I wish and want for every human on this planet. Is like, I can't go into liberated love and heal codependency with Mark if I'm allowing abuse in my family dynamic, or, you know, in a workplace dynamic. Like, it's just, my heart will be closed. There is not enough safety in my nervous system at that point in time. And so what I've seen happen is like the women stepping forward and holding a new bar, reconnecting to their anger, reconnecting to their needs, their desires, and this fire of like, I will no longer tolerate what I've been tolerating. And that's a really vulnerable process for women, because taking up space, having a connection to your anger, asserting yourself, having more agency has historically been really not a safe thing to do. Dangerous, very dangerous. So it's like my work has been supporting women in that process of like not taking on too much, not internalizing out bad or, you know, less than savory outcomes. Of course, taking responsibility for what is theirs, but then actually doing something with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
I think even at that core of the motivation often for women to learn about relationship is to create safety in relationship with men. Yep. So the intention shifts. You know, instead of to manage my external environment, it's actually to give birth to all of me, like to actually blossom and turn in. I mean, you can really easily differentiate if someone's ready to take responsibility for their life, because there is no stepping into interdependency and healing codependency and stepping into liberated love without two humans taking responsibility for what they bring and being willing to get feedback about and having humility. You got to be, and I'd say the first piece of humble pie you eat is dump truck of humble pie. Because if you've been playing the victim your whole life, you know, I think there's two parts of that. One, when talking about victim mindset and not taking responsibility for one's life is often confused and conflated with negating being a victim. And I think it's just always so important to point to people that you can be the victim of seriously awful things, and we can't change it. So it's like, what do we do with it? Right. And I think a lot of your question that you ask a lot, Terri, which is, what is the secondary gain you get by staying in that place where life doesn't work out for you? It's not fair. It's not. Yeah. And again, those can all be true up until the moment that you say, I'm ready to change my life. My work is not for people who don't want to take responsibility for their life. Right. There is other people who work for people like that. I just don't think you'll ever engage in real change and experience trust, because you don't trust yourself, because you can't trust yourself if you can't orient to the truth with realness.
Yeah. So I think there's something about, though, what you guys were saying before about, Kai, you had mentioned like the taking too much responsibility for the relationship, taking a bigger piece of the relationship pie and being like, maybe I can make all the changes. You know what I mean? Maybe. And that really speaks to high functioning codependency and speaks to, in so many ways, women in particular have just had to do it all in a lot of ways. You know, men made the money for a long time. And like, if we look at like historically how things have changed from the 60s to the 70s, and really it was in the 70s where women could do something other than be a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary, right? Those were like the three things you could do. And I always have this theory that, you know, as more opportunities to be anything became more and more available to women, and let me be clear, white women, because of course those opportunities didn't happen for women of color for a really long time after that. But it's almost like we felt compelled to be like, we'll still do everything at home too. So don't take away this exciting opportunity for me to become whatever it is you want to, you know, an astronaut. We'll still, and so the doing it all, it became this habituated, and of course this doesn't speak to everyone, but it definitely speaks to my audience for sure. I've got the most high functioning, unbelievably competent and capable women on planet Earth are in my audience. But
that's a compliment. That's a big compliment.
But they're tired, right? And so part of what you guys are talking about, and what I love in the book, there's a whole bunch of stuff about nervous system stuff, is that there's a cost for doing that. There's a cost to be codependent. There's a cost to be overly focused on others. There's a cost to outsource. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I think you just named a lot of the costs, like the physical, mental, emotional well-being, for sure. Cost, like when you're over-focused, all of your energy, you're in a nervous system state of hypervigilance.
You can't rest. You can't heal. I mean, I think of all the research looking at physiological impacts of high conflict, but it would be the same just being in a state of vigilance all the time, feeling like your relationship is actually the source of your woes, not the source of your growth. One, it exhales the body. Even in times of constraint, there's a deeper trust in knowing. And that's why nervous system, like healing the nervous system by being able to create a self-regulated, but then to regulate together is so powerful.
Yeah. And a lot of the work that we kind of unpack in the book has to do with that resourcing, adequate resourcing, like creating the resources you need to cultivate that self-regulation through co-regulation. Because if you haven't had that foundation of sufficient co-regulation in childhood, you do need other people to help your nervous system co-regulate, one, and then learn how to self-regulate through that co-regulation. So that's a very important piece of the pie. But then there's all these other ways that we can resource from other people, from other beings, from the planet. And then there's also the internal resources we need to have, like the emotional vocabulary. Do I even know how to
Yeah.
name and identify my emotions?
Totally.
Yeah.
Do I even know what an emotional need is? Do I have like communication frameworks to support me in actually externalizing what is happening in this world? Like that's a resource for sure.
Yep.
In my experience, financial competency, like that being a really big one. And I think our cultural landscape right now, especially for women, is, do we have enough financial safety to be able to access agency and choice? And I realize that, there's a lot of layers to that conversation specifically. But for me in my journey and what we talk about in the book, that was a really big resource that I needed to really cultivate to be able to access and know in my relationship with Mark, because of how much safety I was sourcing through him financially. Also, like, I had never seen it modeled that a woman was standing on her own 2 feet in my lineage. Yeah. So it was like, I don't know what that looks like. And what happens when I do move beyond where the women in my lineage have gone? Mm-hmm. Do I rock the boat? Probably. Absolutely. I did. And it sucked. It was really hard to be like, I'm moving out of these patterns. And I'm going to resource myself, and it's not going to be comfortable. And I hired a lot of mentors and somatic therapists and you name it. I hired them to support me in this journey, but I needed to be able to embody. Really, I needed to be able to hold the capacity to receive more. And I think the biggest one, Terri, is not at the expense of self. I learned that like in business. It's like, oh, I'm going to receive from the external world, but now I'm going to give everything of me. And that pattern just showed up again and I almost died. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh.
It's so common though. Oh my God. I see it in my mastermind. I see it in my groups. The same thing where we know how to make money. We can get people to pay us. And then somehow there's this compulsion to overgive, to over deliver. And it's like, usually there's a worthiness piece. And the differentiating that you're talking about is really so important. Differentiating from our generationally, from family of origin, it's like, are we going to get kicked out of our little pack? Like, is that happening? Yeah. And what happens if it does? And I feel like you're really talking about a visceral and physiological fear of death, right? And yet we're really talking about a psychological and emotional and sort of ideological death, right? Like we're changing what's possible. When you decide liberated love is something that could be a possibility for you, because I think it could be a possibility for everyone. And if you can get this book, if this is interesting to you, because it walks you through the steps of actually doing it, because the taking responsibility for yourself. And I think with a lot of family systems, you will find that some people will embrace you differentiating. Some people will feel threatened by you differentiating. And yet we must live our own lives nonetheless, regardless. And I think that really the codependency piece, helping people move past that with the family of origin, really allows this opening for people to become really who they are, who they're meant to be, to bring to the world the gifts that they have. Like us staying small doesn't do shit for anybody else. Like it actually doesn't, right? You make your family proud when you do these things, to a degree.
Yeah, I always like to say coddling isn't loving. Like playing small isn't loving. That's not love. It's not fierce love.
And you get to protect someone else from their own power, from their own potential. It's like, what? I think what's so fascinating about codependency, or just often normal, quote unquote, relational dynamics, is when we break up, all of a sudden we pursue our dream. We break up, we go back to school, we go on a trip, we do the thing we wanted, we reclaim our bodies, we step into nutrition. And I'm always like, why isn't the relationship the place that births more voice? Like being able to say, hey, I noticed that you don't advocate for yourself a lot, and I really want that for you. Or I noticed that you don't use your voice as much, or you're hiding here. Like Kai said to me the other day, like, it's time to do more TV stuff, like stop. And I was like, but she sees things I don't see. I know when she said it, it was an obvious that I'm, limiting myself out of fear. And so I think there's the thing that happens in the relationship interpersonally, obviously then has to replicate out into the systems, that our friendships, our families, But then it starts to ripple into community, into country, into social media.
Yep.
And you see what's happening in the micro is happening in the meta. And then you also have, as above, so below. Like once you hear this, you're like, holy shit, I'm powerful. And then you can't pretend you're not anywhere else. And if you do turn down the volume to 80% somewhere, you have to turn it down everywhere.
Yep.
And that's a painful truth to recognize. And I just realized, I remember talking to Sherry Salata and I was saying, man, I feel like I peel a layer of the onion and then the onion stays the fucking same size. And I'm like, I'm trying to get to this core of Eckhart Tolle awakening and it ain't happening. And she said something so beautiful to me. She said, maybe instead of thinking that you're peeling layers of understanding to get to a true self or something of that, she said, maybe each time you understand something, you get bigger. You take up more space. You add a layer. And I was like, that's such a better way to think about what I've been doing,
Yes. And it feels good. Like that image feels good because you're like, I'm adding something valuable to myself, to my life.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want that from their partner? Like, I really think I'm only scared if my wife becomes more powerful because in some way I think it compromises my power. And in codependent dynamics, that is actually true. So it's control masquerading as love. We always just have to come back to like, how is my partner coming fully alive? Not in service of me, not in service of the relationship. Like, who wants to leave a relationship that brings them fully alive? No one.
Right.
Unless it requires them staying small and you remind them they're powerful and then you try to hold on to them and then they leave. And then that's exactly what you needed to wake up.
Yes. Question for you guys though. Thoughts about in relationship as you're working through these things, as people are becoming less codependent as we are busting forth into more interdependence. How do you handle being triggered by the other person?
Well, having a kid has changed my capability of handling it as much. I'm coming back into it, but I would say that you and I have talked about this, Terri, that like meditation and those practices really does stretch, the space or the perceived space between stimulus and response. But I think it's the observation of it, observation of that you are activated is a powerful observation. Then where does it lead you? And if we're not getting it right, which we're not always going to get it right, that's a ridiculous expectation.
Right.
Is can we return and repair and repair that rupture and do better next time? So that's how I would say I attempt to orient to it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just because, I just want to name up front, like triggers aren't going anywhere. Like they're just a normal part of this process of connection, disconnection, repair, like trigger, But for me, a lot of it comes back to the body. It's all somatic for me. Like my body will let me know, like immediately trigger. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm activated. I need to hit a pause button.
Yep.
So I need to take a step back, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty good at taking a step back and being able
I don't always like it.
Like find my center again. And I have some practices that I do, like to just like hand on heart, hand on stomach, like, and like take a couple deep breaths. Like I'm here, I've got you, and I'll breathe with you until we're one. If like there's any like younger parts, and it's like, just like, ooh, okay. And then it's getting really curious about the story. Like for me, of course, there's the state that my nervous system is the corresponding story that coincides with that state specifically. So once I calm my state back or move back into some regulation, I'm able to name and identify the stories that are kind of playing out and look at what are the roots of these stories and how are they interplaying with Mark? What's our dance in this dynamic? And how can I shift out of historical ways of responding into more loving and kind ways of responding? And there are so many moments in our relationship 2.0 where we've had the opportunities to practice this. Where it's like, oh, and historically I would pull back, I would avoid, I would go source this intimacy connection from my twin sister or from safer places. I would try to control and like go into this, I love the hyper independent route of like, I'm just going to do it all myself and I'm just going to, I don't need anything from anybody. And it's like,
same.
Okay, calm down. Like that's not going to work here. You have a baby. Like there's a lot of things that you're going to need from Mark. But I've even noticed in the last 2 years, I've been writing the book and also now being a mother, it's like, wow, that is really deep. And I have to continually lean into the vulnerability of I'm not okay sometimes, and I really do need you.
Mhm.
And there's so much like tenderness in that, like, I really do need you,
Yeah.
especially as somebody who doesn't really want to need anybody.
Yep. The hyper independence, though, it's so common, right? And the withdrawn in anger and the withdrawn in hyper independence, where it's like, if my feelings are hurt, I just want to be like, whatever, I'll do. I definitely don't need you, that's for sure. Which, of course, is ridiculous, and I do. But I feel like with the triggers, I had my friend Dr. Shafali, and I know you guys. I think you guys know her too. We were doing something about her last book, and it was live, and we were talking about triggers, and she said something that was so clear, and it's kind of what you just said, Kai. You said triggers aren't going anywhere. No, they're not. But she said 100% of the time, your triggers are about you and your lived experience. So even if the other person is doing something that's messed up, if you're actually triggered and not just reacting to bad behavior, right? Because they're different things.
Right.
It's in you to go, what was the person, place, thing that is the original wound of this, kind of. I mean, that's my language, but that's basically what it is, and how helpful it can be to think about your partner too. I was thinking about this the other day with Vic and I. Something had happened, and he's like a more nervous person, and I'm more it's all going to work out person. So sometimes those things come up against each other, and so he was being nervous about us going away to a wedding in May, and who was going to watch the dog. This is what he's worried about. Like, what's going to happen to Charlie? Well, I don't know. First of all, it's months away. Anyway, so I was trying to be like, okay, well, I haven't even started to try to problem solve. So why don't we just wait a minute? By that point, she'll be 5 or 6 months old. My sister can probably walk. Anyway. And he was like, and I had a dream last night, and told me this whole dream about his over responsibility. And then I'm thinking, here's Vic. He was widowed at 29 with a 5, a 3, and a 1-year-old. So having a baby dog kicks up this hyper responsibility of being solo, even though I'm here, but he's definitely the designated responsible parent for sure. There's no doubt, because I've been writing a book. And I suddenly had all of this like tenderness, like, why are you, stop judging him for what he's experiencing. And then I went back and I was like, do you think that maybe the dream is because of this? And maybe you're feeling the thing. Could that be? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And then Tracy from my team said she'll come and stay with the dog while we're gone. And he was like, oh, that feels so much better. But to come at it from the point of place of like understanding your person. When I was younger and such an ego-driven areas, even in my early 30s with Vic, where I was like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, who the hell would feel that way? Like, why? Life is amazing. You should be grateful. Like, I couldn't wait to make him wrong on all the things. And here's a first generation Eastern European, like, this guy has existential angst in his DNA. Like, leave him the fuck alone. You're just a girl who grew up in New Jersey. Like, relax. You know what I mean? So I do believe that helps with the being triggered stuff.
That's so loving, right? Like what you just described, and being able to understand the many layers of your human.
Yeah, it shows you how well, like when you know someone. I also think it shows you like when you're deeply actually committed and in a long-term, commitment, there's so many deposits and so many levels of awareness of the other person through all the conversations we have, the ruptures, the repairs, that like there's so much more context, and we get to ask more questions and we get to know more about that. Even the ways we've caused some patterns or triggers. Triggers are such beautiful opportunities to heal deeper things. And all they are is a radar. It's just, as you said, is like, Dr. Shafali is like, it's always what's coming up in you. And I hate that truth because I've been triggered. So it's like, that's gross. I don't agree, but I do agree. And I've been thinking a lot more about playing with, when you hear someone like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, and they have these awakenings, and all of a sudden they're like, Byron Katie, I think, was looking at a bug, and she's like, this bug doesn't experience suffering, and Eckhart Tolle was laying on a bench, and all of a sudden he's like, my biological response is not real. And not that it's not actually happening, but it's not an accurate depiction always of the experience.
Right.
And I've been really thinking like the 3 seconds, that we talk about, like between stimulus and response, and meditation sort of extends that. It's like how do I actually just stay in the observer of exploring, and maybe through my partner's help in co-regulating? Because for me, I need, like, how I source safety is to co-regulate.
Mhm.
So when Kai goes into hyper independence, I've already deeply understood, based on the patterns of what her face is doing, that I'm like, she's about to withdraw, check, pursue, engage, engines, and I learn more about advocating for myself, staying in my lane. And that's hard, because when you're in the trigger, the like safety, I love you, I don't, distance isn't safe for me. And for her, distance is safe. So
Right.
there's this really beautiful opportunity to recognize that she needs space and I need closeness. And how do we lean into each other's edges to actually meet each other's needs, but also stretch one another?
That's such a beautiful example. And finding that place in the middle, that's what I think long-term healthy relationships are about. Right, Vic won't always get his need met perfectly. I won't always get my need met perfectly, but we're both always a stand for the relationship. Like no matter what.
Yeah.
So we have our rule that you can't both crack up at the same time. So whoever's losing their shit first, that's the person who's cracking up. And the other person has to be like the stable, normal one, at least for that period of time. No glomming on. We're not allowed to then be like, oh my God. Right? If he's upset, then I have to be the normal one that stands for like reality and like, tell me more about how you feel. And that has really worked well for us. And I feel like that's in itself a form of co-regulating.
Yeah, absolutely. One of you being the anchor.
The curious one.
You play the anchor in this. You play the regulated one, and let me move through this process. Let me move through the emotions that are real and here and alive. And I always like to say, it's something that I feel very grateful for in my own family of origin is connection has always been more important than ego, or more important than protection, more important than everything. There's always a lean in towards repair. And that modeling has been such a beautiful foundation in our relationship as well, because it's like that negativity threshold is quite low. Or it's like, if there's something in between, like we're not just going to sweep it under the rug and leave it there for decades.
No.
Like we can't. Our bodies won't let us. The container of the relationship won't let us. Also, our hearts were like, no, we want to be loved. We want to be connected. So let's move towards repair. And how do we utilize this experience, this trigger, to see something we can't see yet?
Make it better, basically, is what you're saying. Better. You guys, look at this book that my friends wrote. It's called Liberated Love, Release Codependent Patterns and Create the Love You Desire by Mark Groves and Kylie McBeath. You guys, tell us, where can people get your book? It's pre-ordering right now. So tell us.
Yeah, you can get it wherever books are sold. So Amazon, bookshop.org, Audible, there's an audio version coming out. You can go to liberated-love.com. The audio version is actually also going to have end of chapter, like conversations between us about each chapter. So that'll be fun. So get the printed copy first and then get the added bonus.
I like in the Audible.
You can get it pretty much anywhere. You Google it, you'll find it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us for so long today. We appreciate you. Go get this book, people. You're going to love it.